Hey team, Jen here. I am coming to you at the top of week 2, and I wanted to say I'm happy to see that you're still here after week 1. Week 1 can be such a rigorous and daunting week. Um, Sometimes students can feel a little bit overwhelmed after week 1, so I'm really glad that you're still here with us today. As we go into week 2, as you know, my weekly videos, they offer you a sense of place in the course to kind of get your bearings. This week, I want to reflect a little bit on week 1, and I'd like to offer some insights into the readings for week 2 that can help you to be successful with the deliverables that are due. Here in week 2, you have 2 deliverables that are due. You have Forum 2, and you also have your very first response essay of the term. Now, these essays are really important, so I do want to spend a little bit of time giving you some tips on how to approach that essay. Our readings for this week are subtitled Hell on Earth, and it's kind of a hodgepodge of readings from your Norton anthology that deal with Puritan, Quaker ways of thinking. So you'll be reading some poetry, you'll be reading some sermons, you'll be reading some other religious treatises on Puritanism, Quakerism. You'll also be reading Rowlandson, who I kind of sandwiched right in the middle of those readings, who will be writing her Native American captivity narrative. And Rowlandson's captivity narrative, it kind of stands out like a sore thumb in the readings for this week. But there are ways that we can read Rowlandson's narrative into some of the other texts. I'm really interested to see how you're going to treat it. For me, Rowlandson's article is, her text is so important because she's really giving us a first-hand experience of her confrontation with Native Americans. And it's a rare thing to find actually in early American texts. These captivity narratives, of which there were quite a few. Rowlandson's is only one of them that are like this. But Rowlandson gives us a very unique lens through which to view the Native American culture because she was abducted by the Native Americans and she had a chance to be inside their community and to witness how they treated each other, how they functioned, what their value systems seemed to be. So she's relating that to us, and we have to take it with a grain of salt, of course, because she is a white woman settler who is certainly coming to this with her own values and her own biases. But it is a very unique document, so I sandwich it in between these other texts that are talking about their passion for their religion. And these passions, these religious passions, they certainly play a role in how the community was thinking about the Native Americans themselves versus the Native Americans and how they were juxtaposing that in terms of their belief and their value systems. So that's kind of what we're focusing on this week, particularly in terms of looking at the the sinner, the discourse of what it means to sin, and the discourse of what it means to be in hell. A lot of these readings for this week are pretty explicit and they're a little bit extreme. So, again, I'm really looking forward to seeing what you have to say about them. For your week 2 forum, I just want to quickly reflect on the week 1 forum to give you some insights here. It's very important that these forums are treated seriously because for me, the forums are the place where the most work, the most important work happens for the course. So it's like a discussion that we would have in class, a roundtable discussion where we're all sitting around and we're kind of unpacking the complexities of the text. The forums help us to grapple with what is meaningful in these texts, and they help us to practice the key moves of academic inquiry, which is going to be a big help to us when we sit down to write our response papers or to take our tests and quizzes. That kind of inquiry happens in the forums. It's a safe place for you to practice. I want to see very critical thinking happening in these forums, and I want you to really meet the standard of the forums, that each part of your response should be at least 300 words, should always be evidencing close reading and analysis and argumentation, and should be taking direct quotes from the text that you're using. So keep that in mind as you go forward. I was happy to see many students conforming to this in week 1, but I would like to see more students getting on board here in week 2. So make sure that you're writing your forum responses with the rubric at your elbow so that you know exactly what it is that I'm grading for. Here in week 2, the first part of the prompt is asking that you take a look at how the good, the bad, and the noble Indian is presented in these religious texts or these first-hand abduction accounts. What seems to be the consensus about the bad Native American, for example? How are people envisioning the goodness of the Native Americans, for example? And what does it mean to be a noble, Indian? What does that look like in these readings? So you could choose perhaps to hone in on one of those if you find one of them to be very strong from your personal reading of the text. You could focus on all 3 or perhaps 2, but I want to see you getting really down and dirty with this question. And of course, I want you to problematize it, right? To problematize something means that you point your finger at something that doesn't seem quite right, something that seems like there's some tension to it. That's one of the first steps of moving toward an argument. So that is really what I'd like to see from you this week. Part 2 is asking you to interrogate the issues of sensuality in puritanical and Quaker writings. As you may know, to be a Puritan or a Quaker is oftentimes thought of as to be asexual in some ways, or stuffy, or uptight, or rigid. And I think that Bradstreet in particular, and certainly Edwards too, they really challenge that way of thinking about these early American religions, because I think they do bring a certain sensuality and dare I say sexuality to the religion, and perhaps problematically so. So for this second part of the discussion forum, I'd like you to unpack some of those complexities. Where do you see passion? Do you see it? Where do you see sensuality or perhaps even sexuality in some of these texts? Perhaps you don't see any, and that would be fine to say as well. Perhaps it's lacking, and that presents an issue of its own. But those are the 2 things that I want you to focus on for your forum. As usual, I want to see you responding to at least 2 of your peers. I like to see much more than that going on in the forum, but at least 2 to get full credit. And I want those responses to be really substantial. So I want you to add something meaningful to the way that we're thinking about these texts. The last thing I want to talk about in my video today is your response paper. These response papers are so important that I've actually designed my own YouTube channel just for my students that's called the Writing Overview Series. And this is designed to help students to really understand what the terms mean that I use in the class. Terms like problematization or tension or line of inquiry. And it helps students who really need to know the specifics of exactly what I'm looking for. I try to be as clear as possible. We all have had different classes for our freshman writing courses, and every instructor is different in what she values. So I like to be as explicit as I can. If you have any questions, any concerns about writing an academic level essay, please go to my Writing Overview series and read or watch any of the videos that are there that you could find interesting. You'll notice that in every module, I will put some supplemental videos at the end, because those videos I think are the ones that will be most helpful for you during this particular week. This week I include a video on what is the academic genre. It gives you a very broad, sweeping sense of what it is you're being asked to write when you're asked to write an academic essay. And the second video really hones in on what close reading is. The response paper asks you first and foremost to perform a close reading on the text. And a lot of students really aren't sure what that means or what that looks like. So there are other elements of the response paper, but for this response paper, I'm going to be looking very much to see how you've close read the text of your choice. And the other things too, such as making sure that you're problematizing, making sure that you're using evidence in the form of direct quotes from the primary text, making sure that you're displaying how the beliefs that you've chosen from the primary text have affected the colonial context. So I'll be looking for everything that I've outlined, including an argument from you. But step one of that process is really good, firm, close reading. If you don't have that, the other elements aren't going to fall into line. So that's what I'm really going to be prizing. The final thing that I'd like to say about this week 2 response paper is that I don't want you to bring in any extra sources. I really just want you to write a paper with your own ideas, 3 to 5 pages, in which you really explicate, you really explore the text that you've chosen. And you're really showing me close reading. You're showing me analysis, problematization, argumentation, contextualization. If you're not sure what I mean by those things, you can head right over to my writing overview series, but don't let it stress you out. This is a process, it's an 8-week process. And setting goals for yourself here in week 2, I think, is a pretty important thing to do. In fact, I think it would be a great idea if somebody were to start a thread in the student lounge asking us what our goals are for this term now that we're starting to get into it and starting to get knee deep into this course. I hope that you guys have a fantastic week, and I want to encourage you to schedule a time to come to my online office hours if you run into any hiccups along the way, or if you want to talk about these texts in more detail, or if you want me to have a look at what you're writing so far for your response paper. Get a nice early start on those readings. Get a nice early start on the response paper. I hope that you guys have a great week, and I will see you here next time. Bye for now.